Vertical and horizontal shifts. So by using some well-known basic elementary function graphs, we can obtain the graph of the other functions. Okay, so how we can obtain, we will discuss now. So if a new function is formed by performing an operation on a given function, then the graph of the new function is called a transformation of the graph of the original function. For example, the graph of the y equals f of x plus q and y equals f of x plus h are transformation of the graph of y equals f of x. So if you know the graph of f of x, you can obtain graph of these functions easily. Okay, that means let's try to understand the vertical and horizontal shifts on the example. Now we know that the graph of the absolute value of the x function. So this is the graph of the absolute value of the x function. F of x equals absolute value of the x. Or y equals absolute value of the x. Let's say y equals absolute value of the x. This is x-axis, this is y-axis. So, for example, y equals absolute value of the x plus 4, okay? So, let's consider this graph. Y equals absolute value of the x plus 4. The graph of the y equals absolute value of the x plus 4 is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of the x shifted upward 4 units. Okay, why? Because for the value of the x, this is y value, but here we 84. So for the same value of the x, on the here I can show that. For example, this value, this is absolute value of the x value, but here we need absolute value of the x plus 4. So 4 unit to up. Okay, so we go to the up 4 unit. This is 4 unit. Okay, so this is on the curve. For the x equals 0, this is 4. You can observe. Let's say that point is 4, for example. So this is our graph. So y equals absolute value of the x plus 4. The graph of the y equals absolute value of the x plus 4 is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of the x shifted upward 4 units. And let's consider another graph. Y equals absolute value of the x minus 3. Okay. Now, the graph of the y equals absolute value of the x minus 5 is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of the x shifted downward 3 units. Because we subtract the 3 from absolute value of the x. So y value is less than 3 units of this y value, okay? So let's say this is 3 minus 3, the graph like that one. This is y equals absolute value of the x minus 3. Now let's consider the other graphs. Y equals absolute value inside the absolute value x plus 4 and inside the absolute value x minus 5. Okay, so let's consider these graphs. Y equals absolute value x minus 3 and let's use which color? Okay, this one. Y equals absolute value x plus 4. Okay, the graph of y equals absolute value x plus 4 is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of the x shifted to the left 4 unit. Okay, because for example, how I can explain here, for x equals minus 4, you obtain the 0 value. So when x equals -4, this edge point will be go to there. So we shift to left. Okay. So let's sketch quickly all graphs here. X-axis, y-axis. Graph of the absolute value of the x, this one. Y equals absolute value of x. And y equals absolute value x plus 4. This point is -4. So this is the graph y equals absolute value x plus 4. So the graph of y equals x plus 4 is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of the x, shifted to the left 4 units. And the graph of y equals absolute value x minus 5, x minus 5 absolute value, is the same as the graph of y equals absolute value of x, shifted to the right 3 unit. So this is this is 3. So that is our graph. So y equals absolute value x minus 3 is this graph. In general, we can say that comparing the graph of y equals f of x plus k with the graph of y equals f of x, we see that the graph of y equals f of x plus k can be obtained from the graph of y equals f of x. How? By vertically, let's emphasize, by vertically translating or shifting, it is better in my opinion, shifting the graph of the letter of upward key units if key is positive, and downward absolute value of the key unit if key is negative. If key is negative, okay? And similarly, we can say for the other situation, comparing the graph of y equals f of x plus h with the graph of y equals f of x, we see that the graph of y equals f of x plus h can be obtained from the graph of y equals f of x by horizontally shifting or translating, shifting the graph of the letter H. H is a number actually. You need to do, this part is important, left if H is positive and absolute value of the H you need to write if H is negative. H is negative. Okay, briefly, we can say these effects for the vertical and horizontal shifting.